Welcome to another episode of the Make Mental Health Matter show. I am your host, Kelli Melissa Reinhardt, and with every episode, I start out the same way. But I am very excited for my guest today. We actually had a conversation a while ago, and then I was finally able to bring her on, and I just want to kind of start off with there are these moments in our life that happen that we don't necessarily know that it's going to happen. And with whether it's trauma or it is a event or situation or, life happens and things happen that we just don't know it's going to happen. Yeah, that was super general. But really that it leads me into my guest story or the story that she will share with you. So without going into, this elaborate, long, drawn out thing that I often do at the beginning of the show, I will introduce my guest. So 6 years ago, a brain injury derailed, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, so you're going to have to correct me. Chaandani's entire life, which left her navigating PPCS, which is persistent post-concussive syndrome, and an overwhelming amount of loss. Preparing a cup of tea, washing clothes, and sending a simple email became monumental challenges, and her familiar, fast paced lifestyle appeared impossibly far out of reach. Going through years of recovery appointments and eventually ingraining herself in the concussion space allowed her to identify key gaps in service and systems that patients face and the demand for a new path forward. So she is now an educator for medical and allied healthcare practitioners who serve the concussion and PPCS population. She brings a wealth of knowledge gained through experience plus research and is focused on leading systemic change in the delivery of concussion care. So, without further ado, let me bring my guest for today up. We're going to add us both in here. So I know I totally butchered your name. I'm so sorry. Can you say it for me correctly?
Thank you for having me on. Yes, I'd be so happy to help you with my name. It's pronounced Chaandani.
Chaandani.
Yeah.
Okay. I know when we originally had talked, you said it for me, and then I was like, oh man, I should have
You know
asked.
what? That's on both of us. Yeah, as soon as you started your intro today, I sat here thinking, "Oh my gosh, I didn't go over my name. Poor Kelly." So, ask as many times as you want. I've had it forever. And it's helpful to have this kind of moment live because we're able to share that with others if anyone else wants to reach out to me or know how to say my name.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the big thing is if you don't know, ask the question, right? And
Yeah,
I am
absolutely.
guilty of not knowing a lot of things. So I would love for you, I know I gave a brief synopsis of your story and what you do, but can you tell the audience a little bit more about yourself and your story?
Sure. So I am going to start 6 years ago. And actually, I'll start a little bit more than 6 years ago. I'm going to start by introducing what I refer to as my old self. And then that will take us into my story and into where I'm at right now, what brings me to your show with you. So, I used to be a person, my old self used to be a person that was always on the go. So, I worked in the events industry. I found myself working 50 to 70 hours a week, which was definitely normal in that space. Traveling frequently, working at large scale events in crowds of 100,000 or even 500,000 people. Like that was where I excelled. I was able to focus. I loved it. The chaos just like lit my heart up, and it still kind of does, to be honest. And outside of that, I had a very fulsome existence where I was very social. I had hobbies. I had, volunteering commitments. I worked out. I just had a lot of freedom in my life to do what I wanted when I wanted. And so I was living this really fulsome, busy, if you will, existence. And then one day I was in a car accident. And in that car accident, I sustained neck and back injuries, but the worst by far was a concussion brain injury that I sustained. And, I didn't know at the time, but my entire life was about to be put on a total pause with no end date in sight for years on end. So I like to start by sharing a bit about my old self to but to really, really help everyone listening understand the changes that occurred after having that injury. And so, after this injury, all of a sudden I found myself to be a person who couldn't remember how to make a sandwich. And I couldn't leave the house with two shoes on my feet reliably. That's not an expression, that's very direct representation of me leaving the house, looking down at my feet, seeing one shoe and one foot, and then crying because I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what the problem was. And, these are just a couple examples to kind of add some color commentary into my experience. But as you can imagine, I was struggling on those levels as well as a lot of other cognitive levels, which I'm sure we'll dive into some during our chat today. And it really affected every single part of my life. And it rippled into my ability to work, to be a good friend and family member who could be present with people, volunteering commitments, hobbies, sports, my social life. All those things all of a sudden became these, things that weren't for me at that time. So my life did a complete 180, and I, as a result, learned a ton about concussion brain injury that I just wasn't aware of before.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. And I remember when we had talked the first time and you talked about how you literally like couldn't figure out with the shoes, right? Like you're like, I
Mm-hmm.
know something's wrong, but the
Yeah.
brain just didn't connect of like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
you're missing a shoe or hey,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have shoes on. And
Mm-hmm.
I, as you told me the story the very first time,
Mm-hmm.
I am, as I kind of told you, I'm fascinated by the brain and how it
Yeah.
works and the trauma that the brain can sustain and
Mm-hmm.
then the recovery that it can go through, I think is just fascinating.
Absolutely agree. Could not agree more with you. I had that fascination prior in my life, actually, with the brain. And then going through this experience, well, when I was in, the past 6 years of it have been different phases of, survival and then finding ways to find acceptance to some level and then to be able to look back and sort of introspect into the experience. But where I am now, I can say, looking back on everything, my level of fascination is still there. After living a lot of those experiences myself and being tapped into networks of hundreds of other people who are going through similar things. It is really incredible, the brain.
Yeah. What really, I mean, other than the fascination, but
Mhm.
what made you so drawn to wanting to work in the field?
Yeah, honestly. I'm sorry, I might have missed the rest of your
No,
question.
you're good. What led you to actually wanting to work in the field of
Mhm.
what you were going through?
Yeah, so what led me to I have this absolute fire within me that is burning so strong to work in this space. And simply put, going through that experience, being, the patient, I got to see firsthand all these gaps in the system that patients face. I also got to see firsthand all the gaps that exist in public knowledge and medical knowledge, specifically in the space of concussion recovery and the delivery of concussion care. In other words, it was I was deep in the fire, and I was challenged. I struggled. It was horrific at times living that experience. So even at the time when I was facing these massive gaps, like systemic gaps, I knew inside that this is something that there was a fire starting, and I knew that I would want to do something with this. I just didn't have the cognitive wherewithal at that time to do anything. And it wasn't until about last year, year 5, when I started to develop enough of the cognitive wherewithal, back to actually start doing something, with what I had learned and what I had seen, and I was able to, dive deeper into research in the space. Um, so I guess, like, to summarize, going through it myself, that's it.
Yeah, and I think so that was my next kind of question that came up is that timeline because I would think that most people are like, well, what was the timeline? Like how long did it take you? And not that they're not that anybody's experience is going to be exactly the same of what you went through, but
Mhm.
when you have that big of a traumatic head or a traumatic brain injury, then it really truly is time to be able to heal. So what is the like timeline, maybe an average that you have seen or noticed throughout the work that you were doing?
This is such an interesting question. And in a lot of fields and industries, and maybe with certain injuries or illnesses, there is a more defined timeline. The issue, there are many issues in the experience of concussion as well as in the recovery space, we'll say. But a massive glaring issue is that, first off, it's subjective. Second, as you acknowledged, not one person's experience will not closely echo the next person's necessarily. There definitely is crossover in terms of types of symptoms, as well as bodily systems that are affected, as well as the life impacts that can follow from those. So it is actually so hard for me because I don't know. Nobody, quote unquote, really seems to be able to boil it down to an exact science or numbers. I can speak to my experience, as well as separately speak to sort of in general what I've heard from others. And this is unfortunately still very vague. In my experience, it's not like, there were so many different types of cognitive symptoms and struggles that I faced. Anything from what I shared, at the beginning of this conversation, more so from the life impact space, as opposed to just symptom, because that's something that's so important for me. Concussion is often looked at as just like a list of symptoms. Whether, even if you use AI these days and you're just like, what is a concussion? It's so lackluster. It's just pulling from all that we have in textbooks, which really talks about symptoms, but it doesn't talk about the life impact piece. So if I speak, more about symptoms, I just want to kind of like add some like more color commentary for us here. I experienced anything from struggling with language comprehension, keeping up with conversations while they're happening live, to the point where I'd be talking to somebody and then all of a sudden I'd forget, did I just say something or did you say something? Were we talking? Like, it was kind of like, again, so this is me bringing symptom into life impact, right? To try to help other people like understand. So I wanted to share that piece in means of saying that the entire recovery journey, it wasn't chronological. It wasn't like this one bodily system is healed up now and we can move on to the others. It was like a whole big messy array of everything at different times. And when I reference like getting to last year, like the 5-year mark, gaining, as I refer to my cognitive wherewithal back, I think that the way that I define that is just that I had gained enough back across enough areas to be able to feel more like myself, my old self, where I felt very unstoppable and capable and able to think clearly enough if I worked within the parameters that I needed to be able to give enough energy to things in my day to get those done, if that makes sense. So I wanted to, I find it really important to kind of pull apart these parts of the experience because concussion is not too well understood in the general public unless you've actually lived it. And PPCS, persistent post-concussive symptoms, the same thing, not well understood. So I can't just give you a number, although I would like to. And not having a specific end date in sight is something that is extraordinarily deeply emotionally painful and difficult for people to manage in their recovery.
Yeah, I would imagine that not knowing when, like, say you'll get your memory back or say you'll get that life that you used to have back, right? And then also just being, like you talked about that feeling of you knew or felt like something was wrong, but you didn't, it cognitively didn't connect. And so just feeling so frustrated and crying. And I love that you talk about it from the life experience because I think that's what people need to understand. And I do have a question that's popping up in my head, but we have to go to our quick first sponsored break. So once we get back from that, I will ask the question. And so we'll be right back after this quick sponsored break.
Have you ever felt completely alone?
Like your life doesn't matter.
One person dies due to suicide every 40 seconds.
You are not alone. Call the National Suicide Lifeline at 988. Hope and recovery is possible.
1 in 8 people globally live with a mental disorder.
That's why empowering minds saves lives.
We need your help. With only $19 a month, you help us save lives through mental health and suicide prevention education.
Scan the QR code or go to makementalhealthmatter.org to sign up as a warrior for mental health today.
Hello, I'm Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson, also known as Dr. Burnout. You can catch me on Leadership Beyond Burnout on E360 TV on Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Vitality Network, where we focus on emerging women leaders and women leaders.
And like that, we're back. If you happen to be just joining the Make Mental Health Matter show, thank you so much for watching or listening. And my guest and I, we are chatting about her traumatic brain injury that you got from a accident. And then as you moved throughout this journey, the life events or how it impacted your life. And then now working in the concussion space to give more information about what it means to have a concussion. And before we went to the break, I alluded to a question that was popping up in my head. And that is around, and I think you and I had talked about this, but my husband specifically has had multiple concussions over time. And I know yours was from one specific time accident. I'm curious about those that get repeated concussions. And so I think it really plays a factor, especially in sports. If we talk about youth or we talk about maybe multiple accidents over time. So I don't know if you want to specifically chat about multiple concussions.
Sure. I mean, let's dust that surface together. When we did talk originally, you did share that with me, which I'm so sorry to hear about your husband's repeated concussive experiences. It's interesting. Concussions are cumulative type of injury. So when I say dust the surface, I always like to, just be aware of my lane, stay in my lane, and say that I'm not a medical or scientific expert. I definitely am well-informed, very well-informed on the patient experience from my experience, as well as hundreds of others that I've heard from at this point. And so I like to speak from that angle. And I will say that, again, concussions are a cumulative injury. My understanding is that, the more that a person has, like the greater the risk is for the next one having, we'll say, a different type of impact, possibly more far reaching, possibly longer lasting. And so, it's, in my experience, I've heard from people who have, let's say, come from a sporting background or even just an everyday life background where they've, been unlucky in the sense that they've fallen, they've had various injuries that have led to concussion. And in some cases, I have spoken to people who have had multiple injuries and then they've eventually landed with the big one, as we might say, where, again, the effects reach far into many bodily systems. Potentially, they're experiencing PPCS, which is persistent post-concussive symptoms. I'm not saying that there's a direct link between multiple injuries and PPCS, but I will say that what we know from current research right now is that PPCS is, 30% of concussions do become persistent. So that is thousands upon thousands of people who are not recovering in the expected time frame. The expected time frame is a couple days to a couple weeks. And then, medical standards will tell us you should be good to go. You should be back in action, fully resolved, no symptoms, good, stamp of approval. But then we're seeing that 30% rate right now in current research, which to me is very interesting. And it happens to be the area that I specialize in. Something also that I will say, if we kind of come back around to what you're sharing about your husband with his multiple injuries, I have heard this with people who have a sporting background that, you know what, actually, I'm not going to go too in depth there. I think I'll leave it right there for now and not fully take us in that direction. But I'd like to pass it back over to you.
Yeah, no, you're good. I appreciate, and yes, this is just like from, personal experience and knowing what you have been through and what you've heard. And so I love that you share also, hey, I'm in there, I'm doing the research, I'm talking to a lot of people. And I think the only other question that popped into my head was when we're talking about persistent concussion, that is, so you said the timeline. So if they're not within a couple days or a couple weeks, then that's when they have, when they shift it over to the PPCS.
That's right.
Nice. Yeah, I also recognize the language of the cognitive function, like you talked about earlier too, as like it's almost, and I guess I'll put this in perspective of women, of like when you go through premenopause or menopause and we start losing our memory, like I feel like some of it is that way so we can kind of understand a little bit of how that would feel, but it's on such a more extreme level, because it really truly, like the brain isn't actually like firing together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there, a lot of different bodily symptoms and systems can be affected. There's a lot that can come up. And it's interesting that you mentioned, the like understanding from that level of menopause and perimenopause. I've heard that quite frequently. And it's also very timely right now. I feel like there's a lot of conversations in the concussion space around concussion plus menopause, concussion plus perimenopause. And I've spoken with some ladies actually in the past year who, would self-identify as a high achiever with PPCS. So these are very, very capable individuals who have an incredible, either like a life they've created, a business they've created, the way they lead, the way they help others. But they found themselves struggling with PPCS. And they're in an age where they're starting to experience perimenopause and menopause. This is something that I don't personally have expertise on, but I'm very interested in, and we're finally seeing more conversations around because there are some really interesting links, as well as potential crossover in experience, like you mentioned.
Very interesting. And I mean, the big thing about my show is I like to have the conversations that we're not having, just to give a different perspective, but also bring the awareness around all these different things that are happening, right? So I think that's fascinating. And I know, I mean, I'm leading into more of the premenopause, and I have found myself that my memory is the one thing that keeps going. And so I have those moments even that I was like, I don't know, I said something and they're like, what did you say? And I was like, I don't know, what did I say? Right. So,
right. Yeah. And isn't that so confronting, right? Like to have that experience where it sounds like previously that's not something that you've experienced or maybe struggled with, but it's kind of confronting to have any kind of experience where suddenly you're like, oh, like that's not how I function, or that's not me. Right. Even though hopefully it's just in little small bursts at this point in time, but just wanted to share that.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, I come from more of a tech fast-paced background, kind of like you were talking about, and I in the past have always like very quick-witted, and then to find myself struggling to remember what somebody just said like a couple moments ago, it gets really frustrating. But I also have to acknowledge and be aware that like, hey, this is just a time period in my life. And the cool part is that there is so much more research and things that you can do more on a potential holistic level that might be able to help too.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I think there's the way that I operate, at least, is combining Western and Eastern. So Western and holistic type of med or treatment. There are so many things out there. I'd love to have, a chat with you offline as well. And just, about that, if you wanted to dive into any, just again, not an expert in menopause, perimenopause, but definitely am well informed about different types of holistic treatment that people in the concussion space, including myself, have tried, or just that we're aware of that some people find useful.
Yeah, no, I would love to. And I do, so that was actually kind of leading into one of my questions that I had for you is, what have you found that has been helpful in your journey? And or what have you heard has been helpful for others in their journey?
Also, a very interesting question with a capital I. I'm like, ooh, interesting. Because, man, Kelly, I wish I could just boil it down and say, like, these three treatments, everybody has to go try, or most people have to go try. But it's really just not like that in this space. And, so it's funny, me hearing this question from you, I'm inferring and making the assumption that I should go directly into treatments. But truly, what came up for me when you asked that question initially, where my mind went immediately, I want to share first. And that is personal growth and specifically an acceptance journey. Hard stop. That is the number one thing that helped me the most when I zoom out and I look at my entire 6 years of such a wild amount of struggle with so many deep, dark ditches that I found myself in trying to work through this entire experience. And it's something that I fought quite angrily for the first year and a half after my injury. I was very angry. I was angry about my total life derailment, about not being myself anymore, about not having an end date, and not knowing how to just snap my fingers and fix things. And, so it's something that I'm not saying someone listening who has a concussion or PPCS, I'm not saying it's easy, number one. I'm not saying you can just snap your fingers and just accept things and just do it and move forward. But it is something that is so incredibly valuable that it is a process that can happen over time that, in my opinion, helps to unlock further levels of growth when you're able to find just small amounts of acceptance for maybe where you're at in that exact hour that day. Or maybe it's that day or week or month or so on and so forth. That is the number one thing that comes through. But I am also happy to share in general what I've heard as far as treatments, but I'll let you guide us.
No, I think, so I do want to hear about treatments, but I also love that you just said that self-acceptance, because I think that we try to fight against what's happening at those moments because we're so frustrated. And I think this also goes in alignment really with mental health as we
Yeah.
talk about mental health and any of those challenges that come up, is that we fight against it and we're like, this is not me, this is not how I am, right? Like, but when we can get into that space of self or just acceptance in general, that is so empowering to be able
Oh,
to shift into that.
absolutely. Like, you are an expert in this space, and yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's just one of those things that I wish it was a little bit more accessible immediately for people, a little bit easier just to wake up one day and be like, okay, fine, I'll accept, so that the rest of the journey can start unfolding. Because you're really, like in the concussion space, I've coined a lot of different terms to be able to explain how things feel, or, the experience from the inside. And people with PPCS, can be struggling for months. They can be struggling for years of their life, for their whole life. It really depends. But, there's a space of what I call stuckness, where you're not moving forward, you're heavily symptomatic. You're just not moving forward. Maybe you're not really working. You're not really social. You're not really doing everything that used to bring you joy. And it's this, again, the concept of learning to find some levels of acceptance, which definitely does require like sitting in the hard stuff, feeling it, sitting in it, feeling in it, and hopefully not staying there for too long, but just kind of working through pieces. I couldn't agree more with just the level of empowerment that can follow when you're able to do that for yourself.
Yeah. Well, and even, I mean, again, shifting even into that mental health space of, they talk a lot about mindset. And I guess I could even shift it into like a physical, if you're in a lot of pain, like your body's in a lot of pain and we're sitting around just focusing on that specific pain, then we actually have more pain. But when we can start to not let that be the thing that is like holding us in that stuckness, like you said, it actually can really shift you out of this place of being in pain all the time. So if that's helpful for anybody listening or watching to kind of relate to what you might be experiencing, I think that was brilliant what you just said too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And a note on pain. At this point, I have a much deepened level of empathy and understanding after going through this injury that I experienced. I was in pain every single day for 2 full years, my neck and back, after my injury, after my car accident. And I've had multiple surgeries in my life. I've had injuries. I've played sports. Like I've experienced these things, But the level of mental struggle that you can have when the first thing you open your eyes in the morning, you experience is pain and it's just with you constantly, that was just neck and back. I mean, this whole time I've also had experiences with like horrific headaches that stayed for 5 days straight, despite taking medication, despite resting, despite all the things. And I just have like, I feel like almost like emotional for people who are in that pain right now and people who are experiencing this for years on end. It takes such an incredible, strong mindset to be able to just wake up and do life every single day, because that can feel all encompassing. And so I just, that came up in my heart to share. Like, I have such a deep level of empathy.
Yeah. And what brought up in my, forgiveness is something that I'm sure that you also had to, because it was an accident, right? And no matter whose fault it was, there probably had to be a lot of forgiveness for the accident itself, and then yourself, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a forgiveness journey that I took myself on. That I think, at least in my experience, I don't think that these are always chronological or in any certain order, because people are people and it's subjective experience, but that definitely had to follow my levels of acceptance that I found. Acceptance for my life derailment, acceptance for my injuries, acceptance for, actually, I never really found acceptance, to be honest, for the lack of end date. I just did my best to take it on each day. But acceptance around like the accident happening. In my case, I will share that I was assigned 0% fault. So, that definitely took myself on an acceptance as well as forgiveness journey there.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, it's those experiences that we never want to experience, but unfortunately it happens. And then just knowing, I mean, forgiveness is really for you, not for the other person. And I think that's really, really powerful.
It's so powerful. I have goosebumps. I'm a nerd for personal development work, for forgiveness, for deep gratitude. Like, I absolutely. And again, finding that is truly for yourself. And it can be very hard if I keep what I'm sharing today, rooted into concussion, and knowing that, with this injury, people often experience anxiety, depression, so many types of anger. Finding a level of forgiveness can be extraordinarily challenging, and you just might not want to for a while. But my hope is that, people are able to find their way there through various channels.
Yeah. We're going to go to our last quick sponsor break, but once we get back, I would love to just chat a little bit about the actual treatments that you have heard of or utilized yourself. So we'll be right back after this quick sponsor break.
1,917 people die daily from suicide globally.
I lost my middle sister, Carrie, to a completed suicide on February 20th, 2017.
How does Kelli, host of the Make Mental Health Matter show, impact lives?
Number 1, awareness.
My story, however, it isn't unique. I am a domestic violence survivor and a recovering addict. For 14 years, I was in active addiction. And because of Kelli and the work that she does and the opportunity to have my voice heard, I was able to stay clean and sober and have hit a year. I'm still here. And if it wasn't for Kelli answering my call the day that I thought I was going to take my life.
2, conversation.
I'm curious, and I know that I've heard a lot in the BIPOC community, it is very hush-hush. It's like one of those things that you don't talk about. Like, you literally feel like it's not a conversation you can have. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
First, shout out to Kelli, because I'm glad that she asked the question. I researched you before I went on your show, and I saw how real and authentic you were. And I just appreciate the question, because it is different and we have to have tough, courageous conversations. So yes, I always say I'm a triple diversity threat. I'm a Black woman with multiple disabilities. Now, I'm not really a threat, but to other people, I may be, because people fear the unknown and what they're uncomfortable with.
Number 3, education.
Kelli's passionate commitment to mental health awareness is a beautiful thing. It's clear in her social media posts, it's clear in the resources that she puts together, in the activities that she provides, her collaboration with organizations, and the consistent way that she continues to deliver a message encouraging people to understand that they can share openly and to break the stigma around mental health. Kelli's topics cover children and adults, talk about things that we can do as a community, things that we can do individually, and her website is packed with information and resources and all kinds of contacts that you can use to reach out, whether you're dealing with something yourself or you're looking to help somebody else who is struggling. I encourage you to check it out.
And like that, we're back again. If you happen to be just joining the Make Mental Health Matter show, thank you so much for tuning in. My guest is Chaandani. Did I say it right?
You were a step closer. It's Chaandani.
Chaandani.
Okay. Phonetically, it's like the first part phonetically is Chon. Chan.
Chaandani. Okay. I was like, eventually I will.
You know what? We're going to get there. But I like having this kind of practice live. So thank you for your
Of course, yes. That's one of those, like, the memory things, as we were kind of talking about, right? Like, is like, I have to say it over and over and over for my brain to lock in on it. And I try to say it how it's spelled oftentimes. And so I'm like, Chaandani. Chaandani.
Chaandani. Like a knee on your leg. Chaandani.
Chaandani. There we go. Yes. Okay. See, practice.
Perfect.
Yes. So I am just, again, fascinated by the brain and the power of our brain, but also when you have a accident or you have a concussion from not accident, right? Like you hit your head on something. I know that even with babies, like that's why they say don't shake your babies, because you can actually give them concussions. And so there's a lot of ways, or if you hit your head really hard on the ground or on a table or on a car or what, right? Depending on your profession. And I guess in society, we don't think about concussion in that way. We're like, oh, you just hit your head, you're fine. You'll be fine, right? And you talked about that timeline earlier of when you have persistent concussions, which is a longer time frame, but the average medical doctor will say that it's a couple days to a couple weeks, you're good, stamp of approval, see you later. But we don't think about those other times. And our bed, we have this picture right behind it. So sometimes you go, both of us do it, go up really hard and smack our head. And I think that as society, we don't think about those as being concussions, but they are. So I don't know if there's a question there, but I think that it was just kind of leading me into what are those.
May I pop in to
Absolutely, yes.
And then I would love your question.
Yeah.
Just wanted to sprinkle in a fun fact. I think you did a great job of just making the concept of concussion more accessible to everyone, to think about it in a bit of a different way. It's not just the football players, you know? Interestingly, yes, you can get a concussion injury by hitting your head, but you don't actually have to physically hit it. It can be a very strong shake, and there is a type of injury that will happen where your brain is still moving within your skull. And so I like to share that with people as well, because, you know, I spoke to someone who was diagnosed with a concussion, and she described slipping on ice. But I think most people mentally will visualize when I say that someone's slipping and falling and connecting their head with the ice. But she had like one of those wild slips where you're kind of just trying to catch your balance, and it's just like, and then she landed. She didn't hit her head, but she landed in a funny way. But like that level of like action on her spine and neck, like she has a concussion from. And I'm not basing this just on one example. I mean, this is an establishing in the medical community, but I just think that that's an interesting fact for people to share, just to help continue expanding that public awareness and knowledge. And like you said, you know, with like the picture behind your bed, that is an example. I could get on my soapbox and talk about this for a very long time, which I won't do to us today, but I will just say that, you know, with concussion, I really would love for the general public to have an expanded amount of knowledge on this, because even in medical communities, we know it's factual that it is a very much an underdiagnosed injury. So if medical experts aren't even necessarily connecting with that or considering it in some cases, how is the general public supposed to? And I think that a change can start within every single person, even just listening to this kind of conversation, and hopefully that it sparks some interest, some curiosity, or even maybe one of your listeners, watchers, one of your audience members, consumes this content and then they mention it to a friend. And in my mind, I'm like, great, perfect. Like, let's just talk about the concept of concussion and just expand past it is just a football player. It's yes, sports contribute to concussions, of course, but so do car accidents. There's also a very high rate, which I didn't know until I had this injury and then dove headfirst into learning in the space. Unfortunately, domestic abuse is a great contributor to concussion as well. And then some various other slip and fall injuries. So it can really happen in a lot of different ways. And again, I like to just pull apart from sport and say everyday injuries do occur as well.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's great, because I have heard that before too, as like your brain is still moving. And I, in my mind, I'm like, well, then how do we keep our brain from not moving, right?
Isn't that the golden question? I mean, like wearing helmets, like helmets are incredible. Always wear a helmet. Definitely, you can still have a concussion while wearing a helmet, right? Because it's protecting the structure of your head. So how do we do that? I don't have an answer for you, but I do think awareness helps. If someone does sustain a concussion injury, early intervention is key. So going to a medical provider, and if perhaps they don't diagnose you, maybe finding a second opinion if you strongly feel that maybe this is something that you're working through. Starting to, get other help as well is really important. So I can't hold the brain still. I don't know how to do that, but I do know if you intervene early, you have the greatest chances of, a better recovery journey.
Yeah, no, because like you said, I was like, yeah, because helmets just hold the outside structure. They don't hold the inside structure. So there's not really a way to make sure that your brain's not continually moving. But we can be aware that it's not just sports players. It's not just hitting your head. Like that slip and fall example is huge for people to know that if you're like, having those moments that can also cause a concussion. So I think the biggest thing that pops into my head is that if you happen to have these experiences, don't undermine the way that you're feeling, right? If you feel like you really truly got a concussion, go to the doctor for that early intervention. Find the ways that you can help yourself. And I guess, so one question, and this is because I've heard it in the past, is that you don't want to go to sleep after a concussion. Is that a real thing or what?
So we've seen a shift. Like I remember that when I was growing up as well. Like that's what was talked about. That was what was done. If someone, in those days, if someone had a concussion, I even remember the concept of waking them up every 1 hour, every 2 hours, make sure they're still with it. That is not practiced as much these days. I'm saying this with a cautious tone because, again, I don't come from a medical or scientific background. I am, again, well-informed in the space. So I'll leave it at that for now. There are different other protocols in place. I do want to add one more thing. When you had just mentioned this call to action for people, if they do feel that they're take anything you're feeling seriously, find a doctor. Definitely, I'd say see a doctor, a GP. But also, if you are having some things happening that just you don't feel quite right, a lot of people report that after a concussion. Something is off. I don't feel quite right. I'm a little foggy. I'm not quite myself. If you I would suggest finding a physiotherapist who specializes in concussion treatment. That would be a great, see a doctor, see a physio, first and second step for you.
Oh, good. Yeah, those are great steps.
Yeah.
And then we have still about 10 minutes left. So I am curious, just those treatments, or because the reason I ask about this is because we tend to, with my nonprofit organization, we tend to partner more on the holistic space. I also understand general doctors, they have that little tiny timeline that you can see them, but and you just said going to a physio, what was it again?
A physiotherapist that
Physiotherapist.
specializes in concussion. That is a must. They must specialize in concussion, in my belief, as far as recovery.
Awesome. So physiotherapist that
Yes.
specializes in concussion.
Yes.
Another great space. And then we have partnered with a lot of neurofeedback and like brain spotting, holistic alternatives. So I'm just curious what you have experienced or have heard that others know that has helped them.
Great question. So I'd like to start by saying the reason that I am suggesting a physiotherapist who specializes in concussion as a great first/second step is because if that person has sought additional knowledge for themselves, like what they're in concussion, or if it's someone who perhaps has a vested interest and they've served a high volume of people with concussion, it's in my belief that they are able to help spot other flags in terms of what someone is experiencing and potentially make referrals out to other types of treatment, or even just identify, hey, you're also struggling with this. Have you heard about it? You should Google it. So I just want to start there by saying that piece. And if we kind of switch focus and we look on more of the holistic side, in my experience, as well as what I've heard from others in the space, I'll just speak to my experience to start. I also, outside of traditional medical as well as traditional hands-on therapists, which I now work with, which I'll mention later, I've also sought treatment through an osteo who specialized in cranial treatment. So that would fit what you're saying, more so like the holistic space, if you will. I thought that was incredible. It was very helpful in a lot of ways for me personally. Also, I've done acupuncture as a supportive treatment. That really, really helps with fatigue. Again, in my experience, I did a 5-month treatment where I went every single week. And yes, I had a lot of needles in my face. And, I don't love needles myself. So like that really said something about my level of desperation to try to get like this extreme fatigue in check a bit. So acupuncture, in my experience, it was great. I would recommend someone to at least try it. Something else that's quite popular in the concussion space when you think about holistic treatment is hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Again, I've heard people speaking so highly of this. I haven't tried it myself, but it's something that consistently in these circles of concussion and PPCS individuals, like it comes up often. Those are just 3 examples. There are so many more different types of holistic treatment and therapy. Something that works well for people. Some people, again, I sound like I'm being very vague, and I am because it is so subjective, but nutrition, working to make sure you're feeding your brain the right things so that it is able to do everything it can to continue working for you and healing through different parts. And I could be talking about this for a while, but I'll give us like at least some things to start with in means of holistic treatment.
No, I think that's amazing. The hyperbaric chambers, I've heard about those also because when you get more oxygen to your brain, and I live in Colorado, which we're at a higher altitude. Yeah. So I again am not like the data medical professional, right? But I believe, especially as my nonprofit, we're in the mental health and suicide prevention intervention space, is that oxygen or lack of oxygen to the brain has a huge part of people's challenges, more specifically in this state. Again, I don't know if that's like an actual thing, but that's my belief. But I do also know that there is scientific proof that oxygen or lack of oxygen to the brain. So I have heard of those or the hyperbaric chamber being really successful. So that's cool.
It's cool. I definitely am very curious about it, and I consistently hear really positive feedback. Even what you're sharing as well today, I'm like, oh, here we go. There's more positive feedback about that type of treatment. So I remain curious.
Yeah, and I love, the acupuncture or acupressure. I don't know, there's 2 different things, but that I have heard that has been very beneficial for people, even in the mental health space. So yeah, concussion, and it's cool to know that it works really well for lack of energy. I might have to go try it myself.
Check it out. Like, that was definitely my experience. Of course, it might be different for everyone, but I think, like, my understanding with acupuncture, from what I was told at the time, is that there are all these different bodily systems that they are accessing through all the meridians. Meridians in the body, they're accessing through specific points. And, you know, for me, experiencing it, I've had total overwhelming fatigue since my injury. It has been absolutely wild. You know, they might treat that in my body through specific meridians, where the next person who's fatigued will treat different ways. But I definitely am a big believer in that type of treatment. And again, as someone who doesn't love laying there with needles, like, that says a lot.
Yeah, I have done one session. I think I did dry needling, but it was, yeah, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. But
interesting with a capital I again.
yes, exactly. Well, I would love, and this conversation, again, I could totally talk to you for hours just about the brain and how the healing process, I think, is the most important, of just like being able to allow our body, our brain to heal, so that we can get to a place that we feel it probably will never be exactly how we were, but there's a new normal that we can get to. And I think that you are living proof that things happen in our life that we cannot, we don't have a crystal ball to tell us what's going to happen, but we can choose to really, again, accept and move forward and find those things that really truly work for us. So I would love for you to just share, if anybody wants to follow your journey or find you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Thank you for the invitation. So my website is returntolife.ca. Please do check it out. I have, yes, links will be below. Also, if you'd like to send me an email, I invite you to reach me at hello@returntolife.ca. If you'd like to follow me on LinkedIn, I'm Chaandani Khan, and I'm sure that will be linked below for us as well. I invite anyone who's, you know, working through PPCS, if there's anything that you think I could help you with, please let me know. I am actually specifically working with healthcare providers now and helping with continuing education in the concussion and PPCS space. So I also invite you to reach out to connect, and I love community, so I'd love to hear from anyone.
Amazing. Yes. So all the links will be there. And those of you that are listening, it's Return to Life. So that's RETURNTOLIFE.C as in Charlie, A as in Apple, and you can go to her website. Also, yes, and all the links will be in the show notes for this. But I just really appreciate you sharing, first and foremost, your experience, but then also your knowledge and opening up this conversation for those that might be struggling themselves.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was a great conversation with you.
Yeah, amazing. All right, y'all, that was another amazing episode of the Make Mental Health Matter show. I hope that this just brings light to whatever, I mean, maybe you know, have somebody in your life that might be struggling with multiple concussions or a concussion or had an experience, and just knowing that our brain is, we can't keep it in a side not moving, but there are other ways that we can get concussions, and there are people out there that have more knowledge than maybe we do, and getting help up front. So really that if you're not feeling very good or something's going on, get the help that you need and find a doctor, and then even follow up with a physiotherapist that actually specializes in concussion, or try some of the holistic treatments that we happen to mention. Again, it is all subjective. What works for me may not work for you, and vice versa, and that's okay. But don't give up, right? And if you need to hear this, you really truly are not alone. There are a lot of people out in this space that really want to help you. And I know that it can be super frustrating, but I invite you to find those people, the people that can help you. And maybe there is some acceptance that you need along the way, or a little bit of forgiveness for whatever the situation is. But our brains are really, really powerful, and they can heal. And that, I think, is the coolest part, knowing that it is possible, and maybe it will take time. And time is something that is valuable. So how can we help in those ways? And that's for you to really decide. So no matter what you do, please make sure that you come back next Monday. I have another amazing guest. I go live every single Monday. You can watch on E360 TV at 5 p.m. Mountain Denver time, or you can listen on Dream Vision 7 radio at 5 a.m. or 5 p.m. Mountain time. But I will see you next week. Bye, y'all.